we talked about this story a little bit last week, but there's been a bunch of updates. It's a really interesting situation for a lot of different reasons, not just this story, not just the information that was leaked, but also kind of what it demonstrates about the corporate media apparatus, the FBI, and of course the wider war in Ukraine, which has become like my issue. I don't really choose these issues. They kind of choose me, but the war in Ukraine has now become kind of like what COVID was for me, and this show for years was like kind of what was our bread and butter, what we were known for. And now, especially since last time I was on Rogan and that clip just went super viral, this has been the thing. I got another debate that I'm going to do on Ukraine, I think, in a couple weeks. So yeah, this is, I always try my best to stand up against the worst thing that the government is doing. And for, quite a while, it was always the wars in the Middle East. It was the COVID tyranny here at home, inflation, and the destruction of the currency. And now it's really this thing in Ukraine. We still got a lot of the old ones, but this war in Ukraine, which is just so insane, and has really put us closer to nuclear war than we've been since at least the Cuban Missile Crisis, and definitely has pushed us closer to a world war than I would say since the 1940s. So, okay, so I don't know exactly even where to go about this first. So let's just for a little bit of perspective, way back when, way back, stretch your memory all the way back to a few days ago. Okay, as of a few days ago, this was the story. I'm reading from a Reuters article here. The headline, Russia likely behind U.S. military document leaks, U.S. officials say. Read a little bit from this article. Russia, or pro-Russian elements, are likely behind the leaks of several classified U.S. military documents posted on social media that offer a partial month-old snapshot of the war in Ukraine, 3 U.S. officials told Reuters on Friday, while the Justice Department said separately it was probing the leak. The documents appear to have been altered to lower the number of Russian casualties suffered by Russian forces, the U.S. officials said, adding their assessments were informal and separate from the investigation into the leak itself. The U.S. officials spoke on the condition of anonymity, given the sensitivity of the matter, and declined to discuss the documents in any real detail. So that was a few days ago. A few days ago, it had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And yeah, of course, U.S. officials will speak anonymously and claim this. There is no anyway, that's all wrong now. They admit once again, none of that's true. The New York Times just outed the kid, I say kid, 21-year-old, the kid who was the leaker. He has been arrested because that's what we do when people leak information about, evil things that the government's doing or that the government's lying to people. There are severe consequences for people like Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning, for Julian Assange, for Ed Snowden. Those guys, you get real punishments for. The leaks say like that we saw during the Trump administration, the leaks, let's say, of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Who is that leaker? We don't know. There has been no mass effort by the FBI. There's been no effort by the New York Times and the Washington Post to try to locate that leak, right? And you would think that's a much easier one to pin down. There's not that many Supreme Court justices. They don't have that big of a staff. There's only so many people who would have had access to this information, but there's just no effort to get to the bottom of that. This, however, when you're dealing with like the entire, whatever, National Guard, Air Force or whatever, this they get to the bottom of in a second. So now there's a few interesting things about this. So now all that nonsense about Russia being behind this has all completely been dropped. Nobody's saying that, much like with everything that they claim is Russian disinformation. Yeah, it is, until you figure out that these are just U.S. officials lying to the American people. And of course, these media outlets they are to be mouthpieces for them. They don't even there's no editorializing within the article, there's no, like, it's just presented as they always do. This is what the New York Times does all the time too. They say something as like a statement of fact, and then after it say U.S. official claims. So if you're reading it, it's designed to give you the impression that this is the news, and then just like with a tagline of claims a U.S. official. However, the journalist will never, like put in there, we have no way of knowing that this is true. They've claimed these things before and they turned out not to be true. And there's no like, so this is a few days ago, and now a few days we find out that what these U.S. officials were saying was all complete lies. And there's no effort from Reuters to write a piece about how, like, we're being lied to by U.S. officials. Now, I know they speak under anonymity, but there's no one in Reuters going to go, we will not use them as a source anymore in the future. None of that happens. It's just as if it didn't exist. We just move on. Well, that bullshit didn't work. Let's see what's next. And what's next is now they've outed this guy, and he's been arrested. And so now the entire like tone of the corporate press, where they're going with this, has nothing to do with Russia anymore. Now it's all about just smearing this guy, that he was a really bad guy. He's they're claiming he's racist and he's a gun enthusiast, and that he, what they actually say, if you look into it, they're making a bunch of claims about him. I don't know. It's impossible to tell. You certainly can't trust these people at all. Obviously, their goal when they were reporting that this was Russian disinformation, their goal was to challenge the credibility of the things that were, of the classified documents that were leaked. Obviously, now their goal is to paint this guy as a bad person, but it's very clear that they're just doing the government's bidding. What was particularly disturbing about this one is that it seems that it was the Washington Post and the New York Times that actually located the guy and then gave the information to the FBI. So think about that for a second. The government is lying to the American people about perhaps the most important thing in American history. So I'm not overstating that, by the way. One of the things that we found out in these leaked classified documents is that U.S. military is embedded in Ukraine. This is not just a proxy war with Russia anymore. This seems to be a hot war between the United States and Russia. That is up there with the biggest story ever. Like, the two biggest nuclear superpowers in the world are at war on one of those nuclear superpowers' border. That's a big story, and the government's been lying to us about that, right, as they lie with all of these wars. And think about if you were, a journalist, put that in quotes, journalist at the New York Times or the Washington Post, and you just found out that the government was lying to the people about one of the biggest stories in the country's history. And your response is to try to help the government arrest that guy who brought that information to you. What example could better prove what we've been talking about for all of these years? What could just be a clearer display of what the corporate press is? Who they work for. They do not work for the people. They are not interested in getting truth to the people. They are interested in protecting the intelligence agencies. That's their goal in this, okay? They work for the government. They are the enemy of the people, period. And this is, I struggle to think of a more clear-cut example than what just happened in the last 2 days. Than that. You have one guy who is bringing truth to the American people about the lies their government is telling them. And then you have the press who would like to discredit the information and then ultimately arrest the guy who, will probably pay quite a heavy price for bringing this information to us. If past precedent is any indicator, he is going to be in prison in very bad conditions for a very long time.